Welcome back to part 2 of our clinical grief training. In this part, we will talk about our therapeutic stance and grief interventions. Okay, so first we need to probably address just basic skills, often underrated, underestimated on how important they are and how helpful they can be, especially in grief. So first one is just sitting in the heaviness. Clients come to us often having tried to talk to other people, utilizing their support network, or those people that they feel safe talking to, and over time maybe feel like they haven't been the most helpful or understanding. A lot of those messages about, you should be over it by now. And so it's a very sacred space to be a grief therapist and to be able to sit in that heaviness when so many other people in our clients' lives either can't or won't or are unable to. And of course, sometimes clients don't feel safe to talk to other people or don't want to burden other people with their emotions. So sitting in the heaviness, first and foremost, is one of the most important things. Of course, that takes a lot of self-work, and so making sure that you are taking care of yourself when hearing really tragic and horrible stories about people's pain and suffering. Of course, listening, that is a very big therapeutic tool. Never underestimate just listening, validating, offering encouragement, empathizing. These are all things, very basic to our training. Using ourselves, so offering, how that made you feel to hear something they said, or identifying how something is impacting you can often bring the client to a place where they feel seen, because you are impacted in a similar way. It's very validating, but can also maybe bring a different perspective as well. Maybe if they're rejecting a certain feeling within themselves, highlighting, how you see something or view something or feel something can definitely be an intervention in itself. Humor and playfulness. We talk a lot around here about how much we do use humor and playfulness and laugh in sessions. Of course, the topic is really heavy, but it doesn't always have to be sad, and it shouldn't always be sad. But being able to bring humor to, our work can balance out that heaviness and be a relief to our clients who are often feeling so heavy. We, of course, don't want to use humor and playfulness as an avoidance tactic, but in an intentional way in connecting with them and joining in their world. Metaphors can be particularly helpful to help a client see something in a new light. Perhaps if there's avoidance or resistance of a particular idea or concept, it can maybe reduce defenses so that they can maybe accept a new perspective, or even to offer your understanding of something through metaphor. I have here home practice rather than homework, because it is a practice. We are should be doing things at home to make things happen between sessions. So giving clients something to practice at home between sessions can be really helpful, because the 1 hour a week or every 2 weeks that we have with a client is not necessarily sufficient. We need them to start incorporating some of these new ideas, beliefs, and practices into their own life. So making sure that we are giving some sort of home practice for them to leave with each session. Next, we have our mind-body connection practices. And I'm starting with this because often this is what people need first. People often come very dysregulated, very kind of feeling out of control of themselves. They're reacting in ways that they wouldn't normally. That's incongruent with who they are or their character because of their grief. And so we want to bring control to that through mind-body connection practices. So interoceptive activities are things that connect our brain and our body through sensing our body. So we do this through a body scan. we do this through deep breathing. There's so many different types of ways to teach deep breathing. You can use your favorite one, whether that be, belly breathing, square breathing, star breathing, all of the different types. Trauma sensitive yoga, this can be done in a chair, but also on a mat, but really stretching and sensing what those different motions and movements feel like in our body. It's a very inviting type of practice rather than instructive type of practice. So we're not telling clients to do something, but inviting them to try a different movement if it's something that is in their journey and in their desire to do that. Mindfulness practices. This can be normal everyday practices, while eating or drinking or washing the dishes, making sure that we are focusing and paying attention and being very mindful of our body, our breath, our movements during those just everyday routine activities can be really helpful. But even going on, a walk and doing a mindfulness walk, noticing the things around you, noticing how you feel the ground under your feet, the wind against your face, the sun against your skin, all these different types of sensations that you're feeling while walking. And then, of course, sometimes meditations can also be really helpful. Five senses grounding is the image that we have here on this slide, which is a really good tool for kind of stopping any kind of stressful moment or spiral that might be happening. So that 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing that you can taste. By doing this, it kind of rechannels our brain to stop the path that it was on and begin something new. It interrupts that path that it was on to just kind of slow down and pause and come back so that we can regain control over our thought processes. Some others include movement, and this is not to necessarily exercise, while exercise is very healthy, but the purpose is to regulate. So yoga, doing things like destroying things. We hear a lot about the smash rooms that are kind of popping up here and there. Clients have found that super helpful, and it's that muscle engagement that gets that emotion out of the muscle. So our emotions are carried in our bodies, and so we need to do something to get it out of our bodies. And so sometimes it is destroying something through tearing or breaking or hitting, kicking, even chewing. We see this a lot in children, but it is actually an attempt to regulate. So we need to find healthy and helpful ways to allow this behavior to happen. So maybe it's tearing up paper, or maybe it is, breaking something in a safe way that's not going to hurt anyone, hitting a pillow, or our bed, kicking a ball, or, something that's safe to kick, chewing. So maybe that's gum, maybe that's, a taffy or something like that is getting that jaw muscle going. Stretching as well, going back to, getting those emotions out of our muscles. Rhythmic movement, there's a lot of research behind how rhythm can be very regulating. And so that can be the humming, the vibrations, particularly with humming, can be very soothing, as well as tapping, the rhythmic movement of walking or running or stomping. Dancing, there's a lot to be done with dance and movement in that regard. So, how does our body feel when we're angry, and how can we show that through dance? Or how does our body feel when we're sad, and how can we show that through dance? So lots of different opportunities through dancing. How many times do we have those emotions in our body and we hear a song come on and we just belt it out? Or we dance it out. So it's just that, again, that emotional release. Jumping, whether on a trampoline or with a jump rope, can also be a really a good way to move our bodies in a way that is going to help get some emotions out. And progressive muscle relaxation. So the progressive tightening and loosening of muscles where we contract and then release. So all of these mind-body connection practices are going to help our clients find regulation within themselves, regain control over their mind as well as their body. So highly recommend, trying these with clients, encouraging them to try them at home, find what works. Obviously, not all of these things are going to work with every client. So engaging in their interests and what, where they're starting. Next, I want to talk about self-care. So obviously regulation is often the number one. This might also be a tie for number one of what clients need while grieving. Especially in early grief, a lot of times people are not taking care of their basic needs. And so we need to help them find ways to do that, making sure they're getting enough sleep. Sometimes they can't fall asleep or they have nightmares. So how can we help them, build a routine around their bedtime, and how can we give them some tools to calm their brain, calm their body so that they can't sleep. Nutrition is also very important. Are they eating, are they eating healthy foods and drinking enough water? Our brain does not work as well as it needs to or could if we are not hydrated. So drinking enough water is very important, and often this is very much forgotten by people who are grieving because they're just trying to survive. Again, moving, getting out of the house, going for a walk, just doing something to move our bodies. And engaging in some sort of simple pleasure. Maybe that is, sitting on a bench in a park. Maybe that is reading a book. Whatever that simple pleasure might be, really trying to reincorporate that into their daily life. A routine is very, very important. Whether that be, I wake up, I eat breakfast, I go for a walk, I come home and I do some sort of chore. It can be basic things. It doesn't have to be big things, but having some sort of routine throughout the day is going to be incredibly helpful in finding some sort of normalcy again after their loss. Feeling and expressing all feelings. A lot of times our clients come to us because they have not been able to properly or effectively express their emotions or haven't allowed themselves to. So we want to give them a space and encourage them to feel and express all of their feelings, not just the angry ones, but what's beneath the anger, and exploring that with them. Setting the bar. So this is the idea of, setting ourselves up for success each day, because each day is different. A lot of times we hear the colloquial like day by day, but it is sometimes hour by hour and minute by minute. And so we need to set ourselves up for success in what we are expecting of ourselves. And so for our clients, they might have a day where they wake up and it's just not the day. They know that, they can feel that. So let's encourage them to set the bar low that day. Maybe they're not going to do all 5 things on their list of things they wanted to get done. Maybe they do one. Or maybe this is a day they can say, you know what, this isn't going to be a good day. I'm just going to focus on self-care today. And then trying again tomorrow. But each day can and should be different as far as expectations go, especially in early grief. Self-compassion. Oof. This is a tough one we see with a lot of clients. A lot of times they feel so guilty or so ready to be over their grief that they start to have these negative comments toward themselves about, why aren't I better? Why can't I just be over this? And so really helping them find self-compassion for what they're going through and how much they have already accomplished. And so that's definitely an important piece to work on as well. Setting healthy boundaries. This can be for themselves, maybe saying no to things that they don't want to do or don't feel ready to do. This can be in relationships. So, making sure that they feel they can say no to others about, things that they're asking for or needing. So making sure that they have the ability and know-how to set healthy boundaries and helping clients do that and giving them permission to do that too. Sometimes I don't think clients really know that they can say no. Connecting with others. One of the biggest things in grief is to connect with others, have a support system, that they should not be going through this alone. And so helping them identify who are those people. It might be different people than you thought they were. We hear that a lot, that I fully expected it to be this person and it really isn't. It's actually this other person. And so normalizing that, encouraging them to use support from someone in their life, or building new supportive relationships, whether that be through a support group or through some church group or something that is going to give them a sense of connection and receiving that support. Being okay accepting help. A lot of times clients don't want to be a burden, but kind of reimagining what that looks like, that it's not a burden, that people want to help and they're doing this because they care about you. Okay, so the next piece we're going to talk about is exploring memories. There's lots of ways to explore memories with clients. The first thing we have on here is evocative language. And so what we mean by that is using words like dead, died, and death, rather than those other words like passed away, lost, because it's more factual for one, but it's also very kind of direct. And so it starts to give them ownership over what happened, that there's no hiding from this, there's no running away from it, but we have to start owning the fact that this is my new life. So using that evocative language, using very kind of language that might feel like you're punching someone or something, but it's very important for them to not run from or hide from those really hard things. And so if we're able to say it, they'll start to accept it and be able to say it as well. But of course, processing that with them, what's it like to hear me say that? What's it like for you to say that? But using evocative language can be very helpful, particularly with clients who may have a hard time accepting their grief. Using symbols, photos, videos, or other keepsakes. People love talking about their people they love. So asking to see photos or being willing to look at them if they offer them. Being willing to look at videos that they want to share. And so encouraging them to show you who is this person, so I feel like that I know them better, or if they have a keepsake that they really like to keep with them, or maybe a piece of clothing that they wear, talk about it. Talk about, who that person was through these pictures or videos or keepsakes. Another way to explore memories is through writing. So this can be journaling, poetry, letters, even drawing. We had a kiddo who would go home and draw different memories of his dad who died, and he kept a little memory journal through drawings. We had another client who was really afraid of losing all these memories of her dad, an adult client, and so they spent some time in session writing out some of those memories and processing those that way. So there's lots of different ways to use kind of writing or drawing to talk about memories and explore those. A memory book or memory box. So these are kind of keepsake things that we can help clients create or encourage them to create to keep memories of their loved one. A memory bracelet. We make memory bracelets often with our kiddos about their loved one, where they put on different beads corresponding to kind of different prompts. So, what was your loved one's favorite color? We'll put that bead on. What was your loved one's favorite season? Let's put a bead that corresponds to that. So going through different colors, and each color bead represents something different, so that when it's all finished, it has all of these different memories, and they can carry it with them and wear it and remember their loved one by that. Memory sticks. So we have popsicle sticks with different prompts on them. We use them in groups, but we can also use them in individual sessions or family sessions to talk about our loved ones. They have things like, what was your, what's the funniest memory you have about your person? What was their favorite holiday? And let's talk about what was the last holiday that you spent with them. So just different prompts to talk about different parts of their life and their life with their loved one. Directed imagery or empty chair. So we can direct a client to imagine a certain scenario if they're really struggling with a particular event or a memory. We can have them talk to their loved one or even their past self by closing their eyes and kind of directing that conversation without the person actually being here. And that can help resolve some emotions or beliefs that they may have that may be hindering their progress. And then through letters, letters can be a really impactful way to express unexpressed things to their person, or even to an emotion. Can you write a letter to your grief? Can you write a letter to your spouse who passed away? Letting them know, what you miss about them, what you wish they were here doing with you. And so sometimes there's just so many different ways to use letters, but being able to write out and explore and process through writing in that type of way can also be really effective. Okay, so there are lots of ways to explore emotions. A few that we really enjoy using and find really effective. Of course, the emotion wheel or emotion chart, particularly for clients who have a hard time identifying a variety of emotions, giving them some opportunities to identify and label what they're feeling can bring new light to kind of what their internal experience has been and give them a better understanding of that. Creating a feeling mask. So the handout on this slide that says Mind Mask is a type of feeling mask. And it goes through, what am I feeling inside? So what are my true feelings, in decorating that mask in that way. And then the second is, what do I show other people? So in this type of way, we get to process, what am I keeping hidden from others? What am I not letting other people see? And we can go into why might that be? Why don't I feel safe to show people what I'm truly feeling? Or who do I get to let in? Who gets to see that vulnerable part of me? But through doing that, a lot of times new insights will come out about how I'm feeling and how I'm covering up what I'm feeling. A feeling body map. So a lot of times we'll do this with kiddos, either drawing an outline of a figure or even tracing their bodies on paper and having them color in different emotions in their body on paper. So what part of you feels sad? What part of you feels angry? What part of you feels scared? And so they get to color as much sadness as they have in their body. They get to color as much anger, as much fear, but also including some of those positive feelings as well, like happiness and joy. And this can be a good opportunity for kids to learn about having multiple feelings at once, or how we feel different feelings in our bodies. We can talk about what does anger feel like in our bodies, and at the same time. So a really good tool to explore emotions with kiddos through that feeling body map. The sand trays can be really helpful for all ages. I know we think of them for children a lot, but even for adults, it can bring some new insights to light as well by giving prompts about, their story, their grief, and maybe, exploring different parts of that might be coming up, and being able to see it outside of us in this different type of world can help us maybe see things differently and think about it differently. Okay, so expressing emotions, obviously very important. Again, we'll use the feelings chart. This anger iceberg that was created by the Gottman Institute is a really well-known and used tool to help clients identify emotions other than anger. As we know, anger is often the one that we go to because it's safer, but there's so many more that might be contributing to that anger. And so providing some psychoeducation about that, but also helping them identify what are some of those other emotions, because we need to start unpacking some of that in order to make progress. I statements are a fan favorite, ways to state what we're feeling to others, especially when we are keeping everything bottled in, because we don't know how to communicate it or don't feel safe communicating it. So I statements are those: I feel angry because you didn't listen to me when I was talking, whatever it might be. Those I feel blank because blank. So I statements are very, very good. Speaker listener technique can be really helpful to help couples or family members learn how to listen to each other better. It's not a problem solving tool, but it can definitely be helpful in understanding each other better and helping another person understand our emotions and our perspective about the situation. Again, directed imagery, an empty chair can be a helpful way to express emotions that have not yet been expressed. Again, through letters, journals, writing, drawing. For children, we use a lot of board games, got to keep their attention span. And so doing that through games like Jenga, Uno, Candyland, there's lots of different ways you can use those games to help children express their emotions, identify feelings, and even identify coping skills as well. Okay, so another big part of treatment is going to be exploring beliefs, identity, and values. A lot of times people who have gone through a grief experience kind of lose sight of or have big changes in their beliefs, identity, and values. And so we want to help them find their footing again. Maybe it's coming back to who they were, but more likely it's creating something new, because they'll never be the person that they were, because now they're carrying this grief and this loss. So helping them identify new beliefs, what beliefs do they want to carry on with, what beliefs maybe have shifted, and exploring that. Exploring their identity. The person that they lost was someone to them, and they probably influenced their identity. So making sure that we're looking into and helping them explore how their identity has shifted, as well as their values. Sometimes our values shift when we go through a loss, but a lot of times we come back to what is most important, because those values are the foundation of our life, and we want to make sure that they are living out their values in the way that they want to be, in the way that's healthy and helpful for them. So the first activity we have here is called the grief house. You can see the house in all its different parts. Again, that foundation is the values that govern your life. And then from there, we go and we help them identify different parts of who they are, and get to explore that with them. What are some positive things that came from this journey? What helps you cope? Who are the people you let in? How do you blow off steam? What protects you? Who supports you? So lots of different ways to explore their support system, their identity, and of course their values that uphold all of those different parts. The next is Tree of Life. So this is the Tree of Life. It's a narrative therapy project where you create a tree. You can draw this or find an outline online or have the client draw it. But they go through each part, the roots, the ground, the trunk, the branches, the leaves, the fruit, and the storms, to identify different parts of who they are and what's going on in their life. So kind of putting together a big picture about their life right now. And it can be really helpful in one, learning about all of these different things in them, but also they can highlight and think about things that they probably haven't thought about before. So going through each part to really, highlight and explore who they are and what's happening in their life right now. Because you can identify some really important intervention points or strengths that they can utilize that maybe they haven't before. So really great tool. The next is from Brene Brown. It's called How Values Light the Way. So this comes back to how are we living out our values and how can it guide us through hard times. So on the left, you have the lantern, and it goes through what are our values, which is the flame, what protects or upholds our values, and the handle, so that when we're feeling overwhelmed, what can we do to make sure we don't walk away from it? How can we be cognizant of how we're behaving? That will be indicators that we might need more support to come back to our values. So another metaphor about values and how we can make sure we're staying true to that. And then a worksheet on values clarification to help us identify what are our values. Healthy communication and boundaries. This is a biggie as well, because a lot of times clients in grief don't know healthy ways to communicate their feelings to others, especially if they don't feel supported by them or if they feel really vulnerable. And then setting boundaries. How can they step up from themselves during this really hard time? So again, speaker listener technique is one of our favorites to help clients learn how to speak up for themselves and say what they need to say in a healthy and helpful way, and to feel heard and understood by others in their life. I statements as well. Role playing can be really helpful for clients who are just maybe really anxious about a certain situation or going to a certain event or having a certain conversation. So the therapist and client can role play different things that might be coming up to help give them some more confidence and practice in having those conversations or working through those situations. Enactments can also be really helpful if you have more than one person in the room. We can have them talk to each other and kind of guide that conversation to be a really helpful one and kind of dig a little deeper. So having a conversation in a way that maybe they haven't had it before, because the therapist is guiding, what they're saying to each other, and helping them communicate both sides. Okay, so the use of books we find really helpful as well, particularly for clients who like to read. I don't recommend necessarily forcing a client to read if they really just do not like reading. But if they do, these are really good books that we have found a lot of benefit from with our clients. So the first one, Raising an Emotionally Intelligent Child by John Gottman. We give this to a lot of parents who are raising children who, are having a variety of issues. It's a more general book, not specific to grief, but very, very applicable to families going through a grief or loss experience. It's Okay That You're Not Okay by Megan Devine is an incredible book. Megan went through her own grief and loss journey and wrote this book that is giving permission to not be okay, because society wants people to be done with their grief, get over grief, and those messages are so often heard from our loved ones. And so how can we kind of combat that and be okay that we're not okay going through our grief. So really great book there. And then, of course, Self-Compassion by Kristin Neff. Kristin Neff wrote this book. It's incredible. It talks about different ways that we can be kind to ourselves. And again, it's not specific to grief, but we often see that clients need some help with not beating themselves up for not being over it or not being okay. So another really great book recommendation for adults. Some of our favorite books to use with kids are Big Boys Cry. It's a book about, of course, boys, and that it's okay to cry. A lot of times little boys have been raised in a society or a home that has been taught that it's not okay to cry. And so it's a really sweet book, encouraging boys to feel their emotions as well. Life and I is a really great book as well about just loss and death. And so honestly, both of these books, Big Boys Cry and Life and I, can also be used with adults. Really great messages there. And then The Invisible String, not specific to grief, but it has to do with missing a person and how we can feel connected to them. So that's another favorite, and there's lots of activities that we can do with kids and this book and feeling connected to their loved one who has died. Okay, so art can be a very impactful way to work with clients through grief, because not always can we express ourselves through words, whether that's a child or an adult. So being creative, using different art mediums with children, with teens, with adults can kind of unlock or give another way to express what they have going on internally. So again, memory jar. So memory jar can be that you have a jar and you write memories on tissue paper and you Mod Podge the paper on the outside and put a little tea light inside so that when you light it up, you can see all the different colors and all the different memories. It's a really sweet thing to have to take home. We talked about the memory box and memory book and bracelets. Collages can be really helpful to help clients explore different parts of their world. So you can see this one done by a teen is about her grief journey and just feeling alone after her loss. Sometimes we'll do collages for identity to help them explore, like, who are you and what are your values and how do you see yourself. We've done collages like a before and after my grief, just to kind of compare, how we've changed with our grief. So lots of different ways to use collages. We can draw, write, or paint stories about grief or how our emotions are within our bodies. So we can kind of put that out on paper. You can see the drawing at the top is from a little girl whose brother died. And so you can see the before and after of her grief. And so that's a really meaningful way to show how she's feeling and what her grief story has been like. We've also had some clients get really creative and draw comic strips about their grief story. So that's another way to kind of express or get out their grief narrative. And clay sculpting, how can we turn grief into a little monster that we sculpt out, or we can sculpt our sadness. And so we can create these little creatures or even something more abstract to express or convey our grief and our emotions. Play. This is obviously mostly for kiddos, but very, very important is play. Play is the first language of children, so we want to make sure that we are giving them an opportunity to play. So we can do this in sessions through child-centered play, giving them an opportunity to explore and express whatever they need to through child-directed play. We can do imaginary or pretend play. A lot of times they'll initiate this, and so being able to go along and join their world can be really meaningful, and we can learn a lot about what's happening in their internal world through their play and looking at themes and behaviors that come out through characters. Puppets. We have seen so many really wonderful things happen in using puppets. It gives children a way to voice what they need to voice through a character so that they don't feel so vulnerable expressing it themselves. That can be through a specific puppet show. That can be, creating these paper bag puppets of people in their life, and they can talk through those puppets, or even creating puppets that are feeling monsters. So maybe this one's a sad monster and this one's an angry monster, and they can use those to express their angry and sad feelings in a fun but also really expressive way. And of course, dollhouses. Dollhouses can give us a look into what's happening at home. A lot of times kids will kind of reenact things that are happening within their household. And so it gives us a lot of information about maybe some intervention points or a look into their world when they're not in session with us. All right, emotion regulation and coping skills. We talked a lot about those at the very beginning, those mind-body connection practices and relaxation skills. So of course, all of those are important, but additional ways to kind of help with emotional regulation, particularly with children, is creating this engine plate. So helping a child understand that they, like a car or a train, has an engine, and sometimes it goes really, really fast, or it's running too high, and sometimes it's just too low and we're not running high enough. And so talking about the different parts, what does it look like when we're going too high? What does it look like when we're running too low? And what if we're just right, right in the middle? And so they can talk about different ways that their body works when it's too high or too low or just right, and how their mind works, and different ways to bring it down if it's too high or bring it up if it's too low. Also a feelings thermometer, so we can talk about how we feel feelings at different intensities. If we're just a little bit angry versus really, really mad, what does that look like? What does that feel like in our bodies? So feelings thermometers can help just provide some insight and education about how we feel feelings in different ways. An emotional safety plan can be really helpful for both children and adults. And so this has to do with how can I take care of myself when I'm feeling a wave of grief. So if I'm noticing that I'm getting overwhelmed, who can I go to? Who can I talk to? Where can I go? And doing that in different contexts. So if I'm at school, if I'm at work, if I'm at home, if I'm at baseball practice. So really trying to think through different scenarios where we might start to feel overwhelmed, which we call a grief wave, and how can I take care of myself at that time? And then of course, coping skills games. There's lots of games that we can play with children to help them learn different coping skills. We have kind of coping skills cards that we can do as like a memory game, or practice different ones in different games that we can make up. So, and sometimes it's fun to have the kid make up the games too, so they feel a little in control of their treatment as well. Okay, parent-child therapy and behavior modification. Of course, anytime we're treating a child, we want to make sure we're also engaging with the parents or family as a whole. And what we hear a lot of is that, there's behavioral issues, which is to be expected because kids don't always have words to express what they're feeling, so they show us. And so some ways to help families through grief is through filial play therapy. So that's a particular model that you can receive training in. It really helps the parents engage with their child, attune to their child and what emotions they're having through special playtime, but also sets structure and gives parents some tools to set structure with their children. Emotion coaching is one of our favorites. That John Gottman book, Raising an Emotionally Intelligent Child, goes through emotion coaching, but helping a parent navigate their children's emotions through emotion coaching and giving them specific tools to, how do I respond? What do I say? What do I do? To help them teach their child how to manage their emotions. So this emotion coaching image is really helpful. We print it out and give it to parents and just kind of talk through it with them. Sometimes we'll spend a whole session on going through different scenarios and having them practice and role play, but also getting the child in there and helping coach them through the emotion coaching steps. Using reward charts and token economies to reward positive behavior and to praise and encourage positive behavior. A lot of times parents default to a lot of negative attention to behaviors they don't want, which is not necessarily the most helpful. So encouraging them to find the good, find the positive, and reward and reinforce through whether reward charts or token economy. Redos can be so helpful. That's that in the moment kind of redirection of a child's behavior. If maybe they said something a little sassy or were defiant, and so giving them an opportunity to redo that behavior in a more helpful and positive way that we're looking for. And that takes some coaching. So that in the moment coaching is going to be more helpful than, lecturing or, talking about why that was not okay. But giving them an opportunity to try again is going to, again, build that muscle memory so that they know what you're looking for and that they feel good about that, which goes into praise. We want to praise all of the positive things, finding good things that they're doing, helpful things, healthy things, and making sure they know that. I loved how you just shared that with your brother. Goes a long way, making them feel good about themselves and the choices they're making. Positive reinforcement is all of those that we've just been talking about, again, reinforcing positive behaviors. But it really has to start with clear expectations and consistency and predictability. A child has to know what you are expecting of them in order to be expected to do it. And it can't be flip-flopped. It can't be some days or sometimes we do, but sometimes we don't really kind of get onto them for it. You're going to find the most change with the most stability and structure. So how can we be consistent and predictable with what we're doing as parents? So helping parents find ways to be consistent and be predictable. And honestly, it takes a lot of problem solving sometimes, particularly in grief, because this might be a new single parent. Maybe they had a co-parent and that was the one that really handled the behavioral issues, and now they're having to step up. And so they are learning this for the first time. So being patient with them, but also holding them accountable to making changes for their child, because their child cannot and should not be expected to make the changes for the family. All right, last thing is psychoeducation. This goes a long way. A lot of people have heard really wrong things about grief, and so we want to correct that. So we want to dispel myths about grief. We talked about that in the general grief training. We need to give them the same education. We need to let them know, no, there is no timeline. I know that you've probably heard, just get through the anniversary, it'll be easier, but that's not necessarily true. And so helping them understand that what they've heard is probably not accurate, and giving them some accurate information about maybe what they've heard about grief. And that can be really validating and normalizing for their experience and take a lot of pressure and stress off. Talking about common grief reactions, we have a handout that goes through common grief reactions in lots of different ways. And so that can be really helpful to give clients to help them see how impactful grief is on our whole self as a person. It's not just an emotional process, but it is impacting all of who we are. And so helping them just kind of look at and look into themselves and how deep their grief is impacting them. And then educating them about the brain and their brain functioning around grief. We have another training that's on kind of the brain, how the brain functions through grief, which you can watch. But all in all, grief impacts how our brain works. Brain fog is real. And so we need to help all of our clients understand what is happening. One of our favorite things is this hand model of the brain. We talk about this a lot with trauma, but trauma and grief are so close in how they impact the human functioning that we use this for grief as well. And so when our lid is flipped, we do not have access to that prefrontal cortex, meaning we can't think logically, we can't make decisions well, and so we need to bring that back down. And so that's where we bring in our emotion regulation tools, those mind-body connection practices, to bring that brain back online. There's lots of videos about this hand model of the brain, but even talking to clients and teaching them about this model can bring them some understanding about what's happening within them and to give themselves grace for what's happening. A few final notes on grief therapy. We have a lot of clients who have compounding losses. Maybe they've lost several different people across the last 5 years or across their lifetime, or maybe they lost several people all at once, or there's just been so much change all at once. And so when this happens, each loss does need to be addressed separately. Those were different relationships, and probably have different impacts on their grief. But when people are experiencing multiple or compounding losses, we're going to start with that one that has the fewest complicating factors. Usually people will find some relief after that first one has been addressed. So if we can get them some relief, we want to start with that one first, and then move towards the others. Families and grief, each person, of course, presents differently. And this impacts a lot of the family's functioning. So we need to consider all of the different relationships and contexts and their differences in roles and relationships with the person who died, and explore the different experiences that they're having. Have them communicate about it, have them know about it, so that they know what each person in their family is going through and how to attend to them and give them what they need. Again, dispel those myths about grief, because they might have some thoughts about, this family member not grieving correctly, or they're not even crying, so that means they didn't love him. So these are big things that, people jump to assumptions. If they're not grieving the way I'm grieving, then it's wrong, or it's bad, or there's something wrong with them. So it's really important to dispel those myths about grief and how it looks differently for different people. And increasing tolerance for openly expressing emotions. We see a lot of protection happening amongst family members. People don't want to hurt each other. People don't want to trigger someone in their grief. So being able to have family sessions to work through these expectations and erroneous beliefs and really help them find ways to communicate and express their emotions and their grief openly, so that they can feel closer and more connected and more supported by each other. Of course, we can't have a training without addressing self with a therapist. So it's really important to make sure that if you're doing grief work, we are also attending to our own losses, and recognize that it might bring up our own feared losses, and our own existential anxiety or personal death. And so making sure that if these are coming up, that we're taking care of ourselves as helping people, so that we can continue doing this really hard work. So get support. This is tough. It's tough work to hear and sit in, so much just trauma and loss. But making sure you're taking care of you while you do it, using your support system, reaching out to colleagues, and other people who can and want to support you. Finally, a few book recommendations to help you do this work. Body Keeps the Score is a very well-known book about how we hold on to feelings in our bodies and how we can help ourselves and help our clients work through that. Grief Counseling and Grief Therapy by William Worden is a good book about, the process of doing grief therapy and grief therapy with families. Finding Meaning by David Kessler, really great book about grief. And then, of course, Loss, Trauma, and Resilience, which is about ambiguous loss by Pauline Voss. So those are some really great books that we've enjoyed reading and have helped us with our work. And that is all that we have for this training. Please feel free to reach out to me if you have any other questions. Thank you for attending, and go out there and do the good work.